is joining, I'd just like to welcome you to today's session. It's a continuation of a session held on Monday on the theory of ISO 540 revised. But today we are going to discuss practical examples of how to apply it during your audit. So, Leon, can we just check how many people have signed in? Should I give a few minutes still?
Yeah, no, the number is increasing rapidly. Hello from my side. Those who don't know me, my name is Leon Combrink. I'm technical director at Draftworks. Been working here nearly 8 years. Yeah, so if you don't know my face, then well, I don't know. Maybe I've missed you somewhere along the way. I've been around for a while.
We certainly know
let's
the voice, Leon.
Yeah, there we go. Yes, somewhere there's a training session somewhere that you've watched, and it's got my voice happening in the background. That's Earl piping up in the background. I think the number of attendees seems to be sort of stabilizing now. So I think, yeah, maybe we can get going. Looking forward to another session. Thanks so much for the training that you brought to us. I hope you as our users are enjoying this info on ISO 540 and are ready to take it on in our updates that we did recently. So I'm just going to hand over to you, Tarina. Thanks very much.
100%. All right, so I'm going to start my slide presentation. While I'm doing so, I'm just giving a quick background on myself for those of you that did not attend on Monday. My name is Tarina Els. I'm the technical and training director at a company called Leaf, and I've been in this profession for over 20 years and I've got experience in private and public sector, auditing, financial reporting, regulation, investigations, a whole lot. But in the end, I like the technical advice and consultation and training the most. So that is why I am presenting this to you today, so that I can hopefully share some of my experience and how to apply this new standard during your audits. All right, so I will be taking you through. Let me just get there. Okay, let's start. Oh, that was just a quick paragraph on me for in case the video wasn't working. So let's look at the agenda for today. We will just spend a few minutes, really just a few, 5 minutes max, on revision of key principles of the standard. And then we'll be jumping in immediately into 3 practical examples. And at the end, if there are any questions, I'll gladly take them and answer what I can. If I can't answer something on the spot, I will get back to you, so you can then email your comments. All right, so just to jump in immediately at our quick revision, in the slides it looked like this, but what I wanted to show you as well is, or tell you about, is that the IAASB issued 2 diagrams. Here I've shown the one, I hope you can see that, but there are 3 diagrams that they shared when they issued this particular standard. And the first one shows linkages to other standards. I'm not showing it again today in this slide, but to remind you of the key requirements, the second flowchart that the IAASB issued together with the standard is a nice one-page summary of all of the requirements of ISO 540 revised. And it takes you very neatly through the main steps, which are risk assessment procedures and related activities, identifying and assessing the risks of material misstatement, responses to assessed risks of material misstatement, disclosures, management bias, and then the overall evaluation based on audit procedures performed, written representations, and communication. So it takes you through these basic steps. So as you can hear all these topics, you can already in your mind's eye see what are the typical steps. But then when we get to the fieldwork section, yes, in the planning already, there are specific considerations, especially when we assess inherent risk and control risk separately. And in inherent risk, we specifically look at measurement uncertainty, complexity, subjectivity, and other factors. So we specifically need to consider those things when we assess our identified risks relating to estimates. And when we get to fieldwork, there are specific testing approaches where you must select one or more of those testing approaches to test auditing estimates. All right, so the third diagram includes more detail in terms of these three testing approaches, which are, let me just get to the right place. The first testing approach is obtaining audit evidence from events occurring up to the date of the auditor's report. Then testing how management made the accounting estimate, and then developing an auditor's point estimate or range of estimates. I'm just going to switch off my video for the time being that you only see the presentation. I think it looks prettier than me. Anyways, okay, so pretty much in your slides, I just included a screenshot of the first page of those two nice diagrams, the detailed requirements and the three testing approaches, just to refresh you for a moment that it comes back to you again as we're going to discuss the examples. Now, before I start explaining the example to you, or
Sorry,
the examples.
Serena?
Yes.
I think your screen sharing was switched off. So
okay.
what we're getting now is a blank screen. Sorry.
Apologies. I'll quickly
switch that on again, please. Thank you very much.
Yes, my apologies. We all have our blonde moments, and so do our computers. There we go.
I think it's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry for that. Thanks, Al. All right. So, going back to what I was going to do in terms of the examples that we are now going to discuss, I'm going to give you quick scenarios. 3 different scenarios. All of them are focused around revenue, because it is revenue, and especially IFRS 15, is very relevant at the moment, because it still feels fairly new and people are still struggling to get around it. And so I'm giving you 3 different scenarios in where estimates are involved in revenue and how we're going to audit it. So what we are going to discuss under each example is there are 5 key questions that I'm going to take you through, and that will help you get into the frame of mind, get the recipe almost going, so that you think of the key things necessary to audit accounting estimates. Okay, my first question that we're going to discuss on each example is, what steps do the auditor need to take to determine the correct approach for auditing the estimate? Then, what would be the most appropriate testing approach for auditing the estimate? That means one of those 3 testing approaches or a combination of them. The third one we will discuss is, what other areas would the auditor need to consider when testing the accounting estimate? Then we specifically talk about, what does the auditor need to consider relating a management bias? So we specifically focus on that. Remember, estimates, after all, include judgment in most instances. And as soon as there's judgment involved, there is a possibility of management bias, which can potentially lead to a fraud risk. So we do need to specifically consider that in terms of ISO 540 revised. And then lastly, we will discuss on each example, how would the auditor then evaluate the results of testing, the current year results of testing the accounting estimate. All right, so with that in mind, let's work through this first example, and then we'll discuss each of these questions in enough detail that you can get into the thing, and you can also recall some of the requirements. I'll discuss it as we work through. All right, but let me read this example for you first. All right, we've got a company called Cupcake Bin or Cupcakes Bin, and Cupcakes Bin is a local supplier of cupcakes, yummy, and all cupcake ingredients and necessities to end customers. So it's cupcakes and cupcake paraphernalia. All right. Customers can order from a wide range of flavors and special cupcake toppings or buy freshly baked cupcakes from the bakery. Orders are usually placed in batches of 12 cupcakes per batch. All right. So that's a bit of a background. Now we get into a little bit more detail. Customers purchasing a batch of the new apple flavored cupcakes during the months of June, goodness me, it's not months, of June. And people who do that receive a price reduction coupon of 12 Rand, which is redeemable on a subsequent purchase of the same apple flavored cupcakes. So, and one batch of apple flavored cupcakes sells for 120 Rand per batch. So pretty much if they buy one batch of apple flavored cupcakes at 120 Rand, the next time they buy apple flavored cupcakes, they can use this price reduction coupon and they pay 12 Rand less on the next batch. All right, so Cupcakes Bin, and this is now where the estimate details come in. They expect, based on their experience, that 75% of customers will use the price reduction coupons. So you can see that based on their experience and whatever is behind it, they say that roughly 75% of customers, they believe or estimate, will use the price reduction coupons. All right, Cupcakes Bin has basic controls in place over the revenue cycle. See, this is information that we need. You'll see now as we discuss it in more detail. But none of these controls addresses estimates made in determining transaction prices in terms of IFRS 15. Management is known to make judgment calls based on gut feel rather than mere facts. This increases the likelihood and potential magnitude of the risk of material misstatement relating to the estimate. Because typically gut feel, there can be potential management bias, isn't it? All right, we'll talk about management bias in a little bit more detail later on. In the previous year, management ran a similar promotion and at that time also estimated that 75% of customers would use the price reduction coupons. Past sales figures show that the actual uptake on previous promotional coupons varied between 70 and 80%. And the previous year actual uptake, which was based on the final actual figures, was in the end 74%. In the previous year audit, the auditor determined that a variance of up to 1.5% from the actual figures or the actual uptake was acceptable. And the last paragraph I'll read to you, but I'll refer back to it because that's almost, we've developed our approach, we've considered facts, we've tested it, and now the results is in the last paragraph. For the current year, the auditor again determined that a variance of up to 1.5% from actual was acceptable. And the actual results after year end showed that 76% of customers used the price reduction coupons. All right, so now that's the background information. So now we can move to our first step or our first question. What steps do the auditor need to take to determine the correct approach for auditing this estimate? Okay, firstly, we've got to always think of these basic things. Now, thankfully, there's in DraftWorks, there's a nice new working paper in planning guiding you through these steps. But it's still a good idea that you understand and familiarize yourself with these steps so that you remember what are the important things you need to do and document. All right, so firstly, you perform risk assessment procedures. And ISO 540 revised specifically wants you to, as part of your risk assessment procedures, obtain a proper knowledge of the business and processes as it relates to estimates. And then based thereon and information that you can obtain, you need to perform a retrospective review to try to see how it influenced risk. And you need to consider whether there are any specialist skills required as well. So that's why I'm addressing those 2 points. The first point that I've got here is about reviewing the outcome of the previous accounting estimates or the subsequent re-estimation to assist in identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement in the current year. So that's our retrospective review. And now, based on that information that I've given you, it was stated in the second last paragraph that the previous year estimate was set at 75% and the actual uptake was 74%, which shows that the previous estimate was reasonable considering that it was only 1% off from actual, and which is within the 1.5% variance that the audit in the previous year it indicated was the acceptable threshold within which it could vary. All right, so pretty much based on that, we can ascertain that the previous year estimate was reasonable. So I don't see any specific additional risk that we can identify from that process that would influence us in the current year when auditing. All right, so you can see why we're asking this. You'll see through our various examples, there will be different answers for this question. Now, secondly, we ask ourselves whether any specialist skills would be required. But if you look at the information that I've given you, it looks fairly simple. It doesn't seem like there are complex estimates involved that would require the use of an expert. I think you as an auditor would be able to audit this. So you've considered it, and based on the scenario, we can conclude no specialist skills were required. Now, next, we need to move on to the next step when trying to get to the correct approach. Now, as part of our understanding of the entity, we must also look at controls. We must look at the design and implementation of controls surrounding estimates. Now, in the information that I've given you on Cupcake's bin, you would recall that it was stated that the controls, that there weren't specific controls in place surrounding the estimates. So since there were none in place, we cannot conclude that the controls are designed or implemented properly because there are none. All right, so we thought of controls and we have a conclusion. So now this builds up to identifying and assessing risks. Obviously, you will now identify specific risks, but just to guide you in terms of how you're going to assess it, let's have a look at, let's think now of control risk. We know there are no specific controls in place, so logically control risk would be set at high. All right. Inherent risk, what do we need to answer? We need to think of estimation uncertainty, complexity, subjectivity, and whether there's any others. And then significant risk, yay or nay. All right, so in terms of estimation uncertainty, yes, management well, it is stated that management bases the estimate on past results, but there is also that gut feel judgment involved. So estimation uncertainty, as soon as there's a bit of judgment involved, estimation uncertainty, the risk goes higher. So it cannot be low. It's not just a model with inputs, process, outputs, you recalculate, and there you've got an answer. So that's why I've in my judgment said, okay, inherent risk is at the medium level because on estimation uncertainty. Now, when we think of complexity, how detailed or complex is this estimate? It's actually very simple. There's no complex estimates or models involved. It's simple. So for complexity, I gave a low risk rating. For subjectivity, that's now the catch on this particular example. Remember, management makes decisions on gut feel. Because of that gut feel, it can easily be very subjective. It may be biased, which definitely increases the likelihood and magnitude of material misstatements relating to the estimate. So because of the subjectivity being, for me, significant, because of that gut feel, because I mean, how can you predict that gut feel? Because of that, I assess, in spite of the other things being low and medium, because of that significant factor, I would give an overall assessment for this as significant. All right, so that subjective element makes it, creates that risk that the estimate can still be materially misstated. And in spite of the fact that past results so far showed that it was reasonably accurate. All right, so what's our response therefore, and therefore our approach to address the risk of material misstatement? Okay, because there's no controls and control risk is high, obviously we will not be testing controls in detail for operating effectiveness, and therefore we would follow a detailed substantive approach. Because we now, due to the subjective nature of the estimate, assess that at a significant risk level, we will actually, as part of our substantive approach, we will have to include tests of detail. Because remember, substantive testing approach can be substantive analytical procedures and test of detail. But as soon as there's a significant risk involved, you must include test of detail. For example, it must include tests like examining of corroborating information, such as agreeing assumptions to third-party published information relevant to similar estimates in the industry. Okay, so now we move on to what would be the actual testing approach and what would be the most appropriate one or ones to test this accounting estimate. Because I mean, so far we've got our overall approach, but now we've got to get to the detailed procedures that we need to perform. And this is where we use the testing approach or approaches, and we must decide based on what we've seen what needs to be done. All right, so what we can see is past sales figures does actually show a reasonable trend, and previous actuals were close to the previous year estimate. So based on that, it does seem that evidence from events occurring up to the date of the auditor's report, that means from year end up to the date of the auditor's report, might be a good source and therefore a good approach to test it. All right, what about other testing approaches? Okay, there is no specific detailed calculation or model used. So therefore, we will not be able to use testing approach 2, which is testing how management perform the estimate, looking at assumptions, data, inputs, and so on, because that's not really there. All right, so it's not possible to use that one. What we can, however, say, because what's the third approach? Considering point estimates or range of estimates. So if information on similar promotions within the same industry is available and other similar promotions within the same company, the auditor may consider developing a point estimate or range of estimates. The circumstances does seem to allow to possibly develop a range of estimates within which management's estimates would be deemed acceptable. Therefore, it actually looks like it would be good to have a combination of using audit evidence occurring up to the date of the audit report and determining a range of acceptable estimates. Right. And now if you think of the information that I've given you, actually that 1.5% from actual variance that the auditor would accept, that is in effect what we now have, what you would have now done and come up with using that range of estimates approach. And then you would look at the actuals and use the two together. Okay, so then what other information, what other areas would we need to consider when testing this accounting estimate? Apart from documenting your procedures performed, evidence obtained, all of in a reperformable manner and so on, because we are now saying that a range of estimates would be developed by the auditor, we must actually, specifically in terms of ISAFR 40, then test specifically the disclosures describing estimation uncertainty. As soon as there's a point estimate or range of estimates involved, we need to test specifically disclosures describing estimation uncertainty. And on top of that, management might need to make additional disclosures relating to the estimate over and above those relating to estimation uncertainty. And then as an auditor, you must always test those as well. All right. And what about management bias? We talked about that a little bit earlier. And what we can say here is, obviously, we saw in the scenario I've given you that judgment makes calls based on gut feel rather than mere facts. Okay, so this just because this already is stated in the facts, and you can get that from the information. This is a possible indicator of management bias. And what does ISA 540 say in paragraph 32? As soon as indicators of possible management bias are identified, then you as auditor must evaluate the implications for the audit. The implications, all right? So you must, as part of the implications would be, you as an auditor must obtain evidence that's more reliable to corroborate the accounting estimate made. And that's why it's also good to look at the actual results up to the date of the audit report, because that corroborates the estimate. And but looking at the information, the estimate is also based on past history and experience. So far, based on the facts, it doesn't seem that there's an intention of management to mislead by this estimate, and therefore it doesn't seem fraudulent in nature. But you can see that we do need to consider, is there possibly an intention to mislead? And if so, it's a fraud risk and therefore significant. And you need to test in so much more detail as soon as it's a fraud risk. All right, so you can see what's the thought process that I go through to decide about this testing, and eventually now we're going to get to the results as well. Okay, so how do we pull it all together? When we evaluate current year results of testing the accounting estimate, now we refer pretty much to that last paragraph of the scenario that I've given you. And that is where I'll just read it to you again. For the current year, the auditor again determined, now based on the range of estimates, that a variance of up to 1.5% from the actual uptake was acceptable. And the actual results after year end showed that 76% of customers used the price reduction coupons. All right, so now looking at that, 76% actual versus 75 estimate, it's 1%. It's within that variance range, acceptable variance range of 1.5% from actual. So it does look like the results are in line with expectations. So firstly, we must answer on how does it impact my risk assessment? Is it still valid? Or should it change? Since the results does seem in line with expectations, there's no indication that the risk assessment needs to change. Okay, then we need to ask, are management's decisions in terms of the estimates in accordance with the financial reporting framework? I did not give you information in this scenario to assess this, so we can for now assume that it was correct. Then you need to evaluate whether sufficient appropriate audit evidence was obtained. I did not mention any scope limitations in this scenario, so you can assume that to be correct. And then we finally get to crunching the numbers. And we must answer, is the accounting estimate and related disclosures reasonable? Are those reasonable? So since we can see that the actuals of 70% versus estimate of 75% is within the acceptable range, based on the combination of the two testing approaches applied, it does appear to be reasonable. I did not give you information, but if there were any disclosures included in the financial statements, then you would have looked at that to also just make sure whether that is correct. Okay, you can see I've spent now a lot of time on the first example, but it's because I'm just trying to get this way of thinking, this method of the typical answers that you need to answer. I want to get that into your head, that you get used to applying that. Now, when we get to example 2 and 3, it will be easier and quicker to get to those typical answers because we now are a bit more used to how to do that. So let's look at example 2, A to Z clothing. All right. A to Z clothing sold gift cards during the December holiday at a total value of 1.2 million rand. The gift cards are valid for up to 1 year from the date of purchase and only at A to Z clothing outlets. All right, so that's where they can use them. Customers are not reimbursed for unspent amounts or unspent cards, and any unspent monies are kept by A to Z clothing. So it's pretty much what's left on the gift cards that were given out. That's what we're talking about. So historical trends show that 5% of gift cards value expired unused. A to Z clothing has sophisticated controls. Okay, that's good. They've got sophisticated controls in place over the revenue cycle with regular detailed reconciliations performed on usage of gift cards that are monitored and approved by the financial manager. Okay, so it sounds like there's something good going on about this. They've got a nice control regime, reconciliations, and it looks like they've got a system. The actual results of the year-end reconciliations are used as basis for determining the estimated percentage of gift card revenue and gift card breakage revenue to be recognized. Okay, gift card breakage revenue is that what in the end is left over, that's unused. All right, so basically it seems like that they actually are using a model. They've got controls in place. All right, A to Z clothing provided draft annual financial statements to the auditor, and it was noted that all the required disclosures were made in accordance with the financial reporting framework. Okay, great. So when we get to those questions surrounding disclosures, we know that it's been made. So it will be easy to get through that. Let's just have a look at this last paragraph. That's now actual results. So when we get to that last step, we'll look at this information. In the previous year, it was estimated that 5% of gift cards value would expire unused. So the previous year estimate was that 5% would be gift card breakage revenue. Based on year-end reconciliations, the actual percentage unused was 5%, and therefore in line with the estimate. Great, so it was exactly the same. Based on this, the year-end estimate was again set at 5% using the same model. The results of the reconciliations performed after year-end up to the date of the audit report this time shows that 4.95% of gift cards value expired unused. All right. So it does seem close, but we obviously will have to do some calculations just to check. Okay, total sales for the period is 10 million and audit materiality was set at 500,000 Rand. Okay, just to give us a ballpark. Okay, so if we go through these basic questions again, looking at the risk assessment procedures, based on our retrospective review, remember that it was estimated as 5%, actuals were 5%, so it does seem reasonable. So based on that, I don't see any additional risks identified. But now, let's think about the complexity of the estimate and whether any specialist skills would be required. Now, I must say I don't think so, because it's based on reconciliations that's reviewed and approved actual calculations. So I don't really see, based on the information that they've given you, it doesn't seem overly complex. So I believe you should, as an auditor, be able to do that again without any specialist skills or knowledge required. Okay, controls. What about controls? Remember, in the data set, it was said that controls over revenue and related estimates are actually quite good. So you would have basically done system descriptions and walkthroughs, and you would have seen that it's actually positive. So it doesn't create any additional risk. So this leads us to looking at control risk. Control risk, based on the information that I've given you, seems to be low. And there are potential controls that could possibly be relied upon. Okay. Inherent risk. Let's have a look at inherent risk. Okay, because they're basing the estimate on past results and the actual reconciliations that they perform, I don't think that the estimation uncertainty is really an issue, and that's why I've assessed it as low. It's based on past results and actual calculations. I don't see judgment involved there at all. Complexity also seems low because it doesn't seem like the model that they use are complex. They're using a specific model, but it doesn't look complex at all. So I also assess that as low. And subjectivity, because there's no really judgment involved, I assess that subjectivity also as low. That means overall, I've assessed this as low risk because of the verifiable method of determining the estimate. All right, so I didn't identify any specific significant risks. So what's our overall response to the risk of material misstatement? What's our audit approach going to be? Okay, so you can now see how it built up from good controls, low control risk, possible controls that can possibly be relied upon. So if based on your, when you look in detail at the risk assessment and the design and implementation, that means your system description and walkthroughs, and you conclude as such, this is a case where you definitely possibly can test controls for operating effectiveness. Great stuff. And then we will just on the next slide talk about the testing approach. And because there aren't any significant risks identified, there's no specific additional evidence and considerations as you would typically do for a significant risk. Okay, so let's talk about what would be the most appropriate testing approach. Okay, you can already see again that similar to the previous example, past results do show reasonable trends. And the previous year actuals were in line with the previous year estimates. So if I look at the evidence from events occurring up to the date of the audit report, it definitely adds again to part of my approach towards testing this estimate. But now, because management actually use specific calculations and reconciliations or a model to develop the estimate, it's actually possible this time to test how management made their actual estimate, looking at inputs, calculations, assumptions, and so forth, all of those things, right? And then having a look at would it be necessary to develop a point estimate or range of estimates? Because they're using a model and it's based on actual results as well, I don't really think there is a need. Based on this, I didn't feel that there would be a need for the auditor to now going to develop additionally a point estimate or range of estimate. It's usually where the measurement is a bit more, there's more uncertainty, estimation uncertainty, subjectivity, things like that involved is where I would definitely involve a point estimate. But for this one, I don't think it's necessary. So basically, we can use a combination of testing how management made the accounting estimate and obtaining evidence up to the date of the audit report. Okay, other areas or specific areas that we might need to consider, apart from just testing disclosures relating to the estimate, other than those related to estimation uncertainty, and documenting everything that we do, because we are now using or we are going to test how management made their estimate. You as an auditor need to now specifically focus on the selection and application of methods, assumptions, and data used by management. And you need to work through those steps. So you need to consider, does the method seem appropriate? Based on the limited info I've given you, it does seem fair, does seem appropriate. Are there judgments made? Okay, we couldn't pick up on judgments, so it doesn't look like there's indicators of management bias. Calculations involved in the estimate, that's now something that you can test by recalculation. Are there any complex modeling considerations? No, it didn't seem very complex. We must consider the integrity of significant assumptions and data maintained. Okay, nothing there. I didn't give you information on any assumptions, so that's probably not the problem. And data used, okay, based on the information that I've given you, the data does seem to be appropriate, giving no rise to possible indicators of management bias. It does seem to be reliable based on past results. So there's no particular indication that the data was incorrectly understood or interpreted. All right, and then we must just, even though we are not developing our own point estimate, then if management used one, we must just see how they've developed their own estimate. What steps did management take to understand estimation uncertainty? But since there aren't point estimates, it's based on the calculations and the model. We don't have to worry about that. Okay, so you can see that because we tested how we're testing how management made the estimate, there are a bit different considerations that come in. All right, now how would the auditor need to what does the auditor need to consider relating to management bias? Okay, based on on this example, using actual historical trends, results, models, I don't see any indicators of management bias. So there's no real further consideration necessary. You just need to answer the question, consider whether there are any indicators. And based on this information and data set, I believe you can conclude comfortably that there doesn't seem to be any indicators because there's no real judgment involved. Okay, so then it leads us to how would we evaluate it? All right, so risk assessment. Are we comfortable that it remains appropriate? Based on that last paragraph in the scenario that I've given you, it did seem that the actual results was in 4.95% of gift card value that expired unused, as opposed to the estimate of 5%, that's 0.05%. So generally, it looks like the results are in line with expectations. So there's no indication that the risk assessment need to change. All right, were management decisions in accordance with the financial reporting framework? Well, based on the limited info I've given you, it does seem to be okay. Did you get sufficient appropriate audit evidence? Okay, I didn't give you that information in the scenario, but you would have been able to answer that based on the evidence that you've obtained. But we can, for this scenario, assume that it's fine. And then crunch the numbers. 1.2 million Rand gift cards sold, and the 5% of that was the estimate of gift card breakage. That equals 60,000 Rand. All right. And if you look at actuals of 4.95% of 1.2 million, it amounts to 59,400 Rand gift card breakage. So the difference is 600 Rand between the actuals and the estimate. So since your materiality is 500,000, and I'm pretty sure your trivial threshold is also still much higher than 600 Rand, we can actually conclude, yes, the estimate is reasonable. And remember, there was one little paragraph or sentence that said all the required disclosures were made. So we can also conclude happily on the disclosures. All right, so that's that one. The big thing that example 2 showed was testing how management made the estimate and the impact of not having real judgment and estimation uncertainty involved. Example 3 brings in another aspect. So let's quickly read through that and chat through the how we would deal with it. Web Solutions is the company's name. Yeah. Web Solutions is a service provider of internet bandwidth capacity. Customers enter into an agreement with Web Solutions and specify the required capacity bandwidth needed, the location or point of presence connectivity, and the duration of the required services. The service is delivered on a 98% service level, and rebates paid to the respective customer in the instance where the company defaults on this 98% service level. The customers billed the fixed fee per month for the capacity bandwidth and a point of presence and for the point of presence connectivity. Okay, so Web Solutions has a key performance indicator as part of their annual performance plan that tracks the rebates that are paid back to the respective customers in instances where they fall below the 98% service level. For the past 2 years, the rebate percentages were 0.05% and 0.007%. And the percentage approximates to roughly 300,000 and the other year 380,000 of total revenue respectively. And for the past 5 years, this has shown a steady decrease. So in line with management expectations. All right. So the company is now expecting a further decrease in the rebate due to new technology. And they estimate that they set an estimated rebate percentage of 0.02. So it dropped from 0.07 to 0.05 to 0.02%. The estimate of the rebate percentage is determined based on a complex method involving estimated revenue, expected stability of the system, expected technological challenges, estimated service levels, and system breakdowns, just to name a few. In the previous year, the company used an IT systems expert specializing in internet service providers in determining the estimated rebate percentages. Okay, so that gives you a feel of how the estimate is done and what's involved. Okay, then we can see that they've got controls in place over the revenue cycle with specific monitoring controls over the input, process, and output of determining the estimated rebate percentages. And once the auditor now did design and implementation testing, they found that controls over inputs and outputs was adequately designed and implemented, but controls over the processes were lacking. They were deficient. All right, there's just a quick sentence to look at actual results and actual things and disclosures in the financial statements. On estimation uncertainty was done as required, but the company did not make any additional disclosures beyond estimation uncertainty, and they should have. Okay. And actual results up to the date of the audit report reflects an actual rebate percentage of 0.4. That's a typo, sorry, that I only discovered last night again when I prepared. 0.045, which is in line with the auditor's own estimate. The auditor's estimate, but we now have to determine whether it's in line with management's estimate as well. With total revenue of 660 million, this approximates 297,000 of the total revenue, the actual percentage. Materiality was set at 6.6 million, performance materiality 4.95 million, and a trivial threshold of 132,000 Rand. All right, so at the steps, you can now see that at previous year's results, it looked like, based on our retrospective review, previous estimates were reasonable and there's no additional risk. But what we can see is this is where a complex estimates are involved. And because management actually used IT specialist skills to develop that estimate, it's a good idea if we as auditors consider the same. All right, so you actually, this is now for an example where that would be the case. Okay, controls, we saw in the set of a data set, input and output controls are good, but process controls are deficient. Okay, looking at control risk, since we know some of it's deficient, I've assessed it at medium. Estimation uncertainty, in terms of inherent risk, I have assessed as medium because management estimates are based on historical trends, but it does also incorporate assumptions as part of that very complex determination. Okay, complexity, this is very high, so the risk goes up because of the complex model used. Subjectivity, though, does seem low because management bases estimates on past results and specific data and methods. It doesn't seem like there are major judgments. So my overall assessment for this was medium, but not significant. Not yet. So generally, we might potentially look at controls testing over input and process, but for input and output, but for process, we're going to have to follow the substantive testing approach. Okay, we said that there were no significant risks. Right. So what would be the most appropriate testing approach for the auditing estimate? Well, now we know management uses a complex model. We will have to test how management made the estimate. At least we can also see past results does show a reasonable trend. And previous year actuals were in line with the previous estimates. So I think evidence from events occurring up to the date of the audit report would also be part of our model. But now, because we will need an IT expert, it's possible that we might need to consider developing, or the IT specialist must also help us with developing a point estimate or range of estimates. So in all probability, based on this scenario, a combination of all three testing approaches would be most appropriate. So you can see it depends on each scenario what you would do, but it is possible to combine all three. Okay, what others? Okay, I don't need to say a lot here. As soon as a range of estimates would be developed, we must specifically test disclosures on the estimation uncertainty. We must always test disclosures beyond that. We now already know that they didn't make everything they didn't disclose anything beyond estimation uncertainty. So there's a deficiency that we're going to have to pull through to our evaluation. And because we're also testing how management made the estimate, we need to test methods, assumption, data. But looking at how complex it is, the IT specialist would probably need to test all of that for us. And then we must also, based on all of this, consider how management selected their point estimate and related disclosures relating to estimation uncertainty. Okay, so those are a couple of things to think about. What about management bias? At least that's one thing that I did not pick up specifically. Although if you dig into a practical scenario at a client, you might find that in these detailed complex matters, there are possibly some assumptions and judgment used. But in the information that I've given you, I did not highlight any possible judgments. So it did not show any particular indicators of management bias. Looking at evaluating the results, okay, does the risk assessment remain appropriate? We now have to have a look a bit. You can see that the results, the actual results after year end was 0.045% of 0.05% rebate. while the expectation was 0.02%. So if you crunch the numbers, it comes up with a difference of 165,000 Rand, which is in excess of the clearly trivial threshold. So because it does differ larger than I would have liked it to, the auditor must consider, does this perhaps show that my risk assessment was not appropriate? We need to up the risk assessment. So we might actually have to bump the risk up to a higher level, and then consider whether we need to do more detailed testing on that. Further testing. All right, so that's a possibility where we need to ask this question. Then we need to ask whether management decisions were in accordance with the financial reporting framework. Okay, again, in this information, I did not indicate all that much, except that I did show that management's decisions relating to disclosures were not fully compliant with the standard. Because when we look at disclosures, I said that not all the required disclosures were made. So they did not completely follow everything that was required in terms of their financial reporting framework. So that's already something we need to report to management, and we need to consider the impact of that lack of required disclosures on the audit report. Scope limitations, no, none were mentioned in the example, but you will have to see in practice, hey, whether you have actual scope limitations. But since we've now already started crunching the numbers, we must now consider, does this mean the estimate is reasonable, yes or no? Okay, so I've calculated a difference of, what was it again, 165,000 Rand compared to the trivial threshold of 132,000. So individually, it's not material yet, but it is not trivial anymore. So what happens is this, we can still conclude that the difference is not individually material, so the estimate is still reasonable. But the difference now goes to your overs and unders, and you have to consider it together with others to see whether there is potentially a material misstatement in revenue. All right. So you can see how the percentages and the things that I've given you doesn't give loads of major differences. But if you come to practical examples during audits where there are bigger differences, it can result in the estimates not being reasonable. And then you need to evaluate the implications for the audit. Either you qualify or management need to adjust their accounting estimate. All right. So, but in this scenario, we can still say it's reasonable, but overs and unders. Okay, so you can see as I've gone through all of this, there are a bunch of things to consider, but you can see that it is still kind of a recipe. Don't now go brain dead and simply follow the recipe and forget to apply your judgment and document your judgment. So please follow the working papers in the draft methodology. That will be clearly illustrated to you in the next session that will be held on Friday. So there is a specific planning working paper in DraftWorks. There is a specific place and field work when you test accounting estimates that take you through the required steps. And there is a specific estimates evaluation working paper in concluding and reporting. Please use those and apply your mind and document how you apply your mind and how you apply your judgment. What are the reasons for your judgments? So you can see that I did not merely give you an answer, yes, no, high, low. I said why the whole time. And that why you must please document in the working papers to clearly support your decisions and judgments made on whether these estimates are reasonable. I'm quickly having a look at the questions, and I don't see any particular Oh, there was a question on what does D&I of controls mean. That is for design and implementation of controls. I don't see other questions that are technically technical of nature, more around the slides. So I leave that in the capable hands of Leon and Earl and Janita. But if you don't have any other questions at the moment, please forward them still if you can, if you need to. Otherwise, thank you very much for having me. And I hope this helped you a little bit more to practically understand how to audit accounting estimates.
And I thank you very, very much for the training over the last 2 sessions. Folks, those that you should be aware that we'll be doing another session on Friday, where we're going to now go and take what we've learned in the last couple of days and look at how we apply that in DraftWorks. And when we were looking at this training, we realized that it's not really going to be beneficial to just go and show you this is where you put numbers in, or this is where you document things in DraftWorks, without giving an opportunity to just try and understand the background and get a good understanding of ISO 540. So we just thank you very much for coming in as our external expert for the last couple of sessions. There have been a number of questions around the slides and the video. You will see if you open up DraftWorks, there is already a link to the video from Monday. And below that video, there is actually also a link to download the slides. So we will do the same thing after today's session. And then after Friday's session, what we will do as well is we will, thank you, Earl, you're going to show just where that is. After Friday's session, what we'll do is we'll start looking at emailing out a full list of all the links, all the attachments, as well as the certificates.
Perfect. Yes. So thanks, Leon. If you just go to youtube.com/draftworks, please subscribe. We're looking for 1,000 subscriber, and all of our videos that we've recorded are actually put up. And if you go and you look at ISO 540, you can see that there is the link to download for Monday already. And this recording will go up tonight, again with the link to download the slides. But as Leon said, we'll send out everything in a batch at the end of the series 2, so probably next week sometime. Okay, perfect. Over to you, Leon.
Okay, well, I think that's basically it. Just a final thank you. And hope to see everybody again on Friday. At this stage, Janita's scheduled to take us through the working papers. And then hopefully after all of that, everybody will be ready for ISO 540 in DraftWorks. Folks, have a fantastic afternoon. Have a great day further. Have a good week. Stay safe and see you all on Friday. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Thanks from my side too. Bye.